There we go. I'm now live. All right. So my name is Dr. Bill Gutman. I am the Director of Aerospace Operations at Spaceport America. And I've been given the, I think, rather enviable task of telling you about some of the wonderful things we have in New Mexico. So we want you all to come to our event, and hopefully we will be back to completely normal next year. But we'd like to remind you that there are some other things in New Mexico besides that. And so my job today is to tell you about some of those things and give you some reasons why you might want to stay with us for an extra few days before or after the Spaceport America Cup. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up a PowerPoint, a presentation, and I'm going to show you some things about New Mexico, and hopefully you will see this. I'm going to go full screen. And so again, things to do in the land of enchantment. And this is informed by more than 4 decades of exploring and learning in New Mexico. That's how long I've been here. So New Mexico is known for the melding of 3 cultures, the Native American culture, the Hispanic culture that goes back to Spain, and the Anglo culture, which came later. It's also known for expansive natural landscapes. It's especially noted for its friendly people, and it's noted for its great weather. Your time spent here will be well rewarded. I can guarantee you of that. So I'll be covering 4 main categories today. One of them are attractions related to science and technology, nature and outdoors, and those are my 2 passions, I have to tell you, culture and history, and then the arts. So let's get started on this, starting off with science and technology. We have a lot of really interesting attractions here in New Mexico, partly because we have 2 national laboratories and a lot of really interesting history has taken place here. So we have some science museums, we have R&D facilities that have visitor attractions, and then astronomy is kind of a special case because we have some observatories and we have some incredible dark skies. So I want to start off with the Spaceport America Visitor Center and Tour. The Spaceport Tour, what I like to call terrestrial tourists. These are the people who aren't going to space but still want to come and see our facility. So we have a museum in the little town of Truth and Consequences, which is a starting off point for some of those tours. And then we have facilities at the Spaceport. So we have some artifacts of some of our flights, and we have some participatory demonstrations that you can use to your satisfaction. But we have another interesting thing at the Spaceport. This is the G-Shock. This is a video. I'm just going to show you a few seconds of this. And that's actually myself in the G-Shock. So this is something that gives you somewhat of a feeling of a G trainer. And it's great fun. Lots of people do it. Not everybody's interested in it, but I find it to be exhilarating. So this is one of the attractions that we have in the Spaceport America Tour. And since you'll be at Spaceport America, this is something that you might very well be able to participate in when you come. We allow people to see some of our structures. This is the Terminal and Hangar Facility, also known as the Gateway to Space. It's an incredibly beautiful building. It was designed by a world-renowned architect, and it has great features. And this is the home of the Virgin Galactic Space Tourism Program. So moving on to some other facilities, White Sands Missile Range, which is a U.S. Army missile test facility, is just across a mountain range from Spaceport America. And one of the things that they have is what they call their missile park and their museum. So these missiles are on exhibit, and many of them have been tested at White Sands Missile Range. It isn't well known, but White Sands Missile Range played a very, very important role in getting us to the moon in the 1960s. Many of the hardware elements were tested here, and a sister facility, the NASA White Sands Test Facility, which is also technically on White Sands Missile Range, was instrumental in testing, among other things, the engines that got us to the surface of the moon and back off the surface of the moon. So this is a view of White Sands Missile Range. Now, White Sands Missile Range is a very large place. It's larger than the 2 smallest U.S. states combined, but it has extremely diverse landscapes. And the headquarters area, which is what you're looking at here, is nestled up against the Organ Mountains. So it's very, very scenic to start with. And one of the things I want to show you is this video, which is actually, after World War II, some captured German V-2 rockets, which had been developed as a weapon of war, were brought to White Sands for testing. And in my view, the first space exploration that was done by humans was done at White Sands Missile Range when people put a camera on one of those rockets. And here's that video. And as you can see, the curvature of the Earth, the dark sky, you can see the landscape from far above. In my view, this was the first time clearly that human eyes had ever seen the Earth from space. And in my view, this is the first true space exploration. So this is one of many types of exhibits that you can find at the White Sands Missile Range Museum. Moving on, in the town of Alamogordo, which is about an hour beyond White Sands Missile Range, is the New Mexico Museum of Space History, which includes the International Space Hall of Fame. So this is a stunning building in a very stunning backdrop against some mountains, and it has a wide variety of exhibits, and it's very, very rewarding place. There is also a planetarium, which is part of the facility, which has rotating shows, which provide some additional insights into space history. In Las Cruces, we have the Las Cruces Museum of Nature and Science. And this museum, like many in New Mexico, specialize in things which are found in the state of New Mexico. So you can see some of the things there. And this is in downtown Las Cruces. Literally, many of you, when you come to the event, to our Spaceport America Cup, many of you will stay in Las Cruces. And this is literally in the backyard if you're staying there. In Albuquerque, a couple of hours to the north from the spaceport, is the New Mexico Museum of Natural History and Science. And again, this museum, many of the exhibits are specializing in things that are found in New Mexico. So for example, in the upper left-hand corner is a map of the state of New Mexico, and those Tyrannosaurus Rex silhouettes indicate places where T-Rex fossils have been found in New Mexico. So you can see in times past, he was a very important visitor to the state. So this is a very interesting museum. It's easy to spend a day there. Moving on to Los Alamos, as probably many of you know, during World War II, Los Alamos National Lab, what is now Los Alamos National Laboratory, was developed for the purpose of advancing nuclear technology. And the Bradbury Science Museum shows a lot of the history of that era. This was a bunch of scientists who were doing things that had never been done before, never even imagined possible. And, you know, they're well known for having developed the nuclear bomb, but along the way, they developed many, many solutions to problems in chemistry, in engineering of various types, and physics. So it was an incredible effort that was going on, and this museum does a great job of capturing some of that. Related to that, in Albuquerque is the National Museum of Nuclear Sciences and History. And again, it chronicles some of the developments. It's somewhat focused on nuclear science as used in warfare, but nevertheless, it's a very interesting museum that has many, many very interesting exhibits. Other types of museums that we have in Santa Teresa, which is about less than an hour south of Las Cruces, we have something known as the War Eagles Museum. This is an aircraft museum which specializes in warplanes. And I believe most of these exhibited aircraft are actually maintained in flyable condition, and the vehicles are maintained in drivable conditions. So it's a very interesting place to spend at least half a day to see all of the things that can be seen there. Again, very close to Las Cruces. Now, another really interesting thing is that New Mexico is the home to 3 U.S. Air Force bases. Well, U.S. Air Force bases are known for their open houses. So since we have 3 Air Force bases, the opportunities to participate in those is more frequent. So they have very interesting exhibits, static exhibits, flying exhibits, and of course, in many cases, the U.S. Air Force Thunderbirds perform. This is the Air Force's precision flying team, and the show is stunning. I've seen it myself, I don't know how many times, at least 6 or 8, and I am always amazed at the incredible flying skills that the pilots exhibit. All right, now moving on to another area of astronomy, New Mexico is home to the National Solar Observatory in Sunspot, which is actually in the Sacramento Mountains. And it's technically, as the crow flies, it's probably only about 70 miles from Las Cruces, but it takes close to 2 hours to drive there because you have to drive up some winding mountain roads. But this is a solar observatory, and it's one of the places that the world relies on to provide information about space weather, you know, to give us forecasts of the kinds of conditions that would maybe adversely affect our satellites, our communication systems, and so on. and it's nestled up in a very scenic area, and it does have a visitor center. At a similar location, very close to that one, is the Apache Point Observatory, which is an astronomical observatory operated by New Mexico State University here in Las Cruces, but for a consortium of other universities. So they have a number of very interesting cutting-edge scientific instruments, including the Sloan Digital Sky Survey Telescope, which is used to keep track of things that are going on in the sky. Probably one of the most well-known facilities in New Mexico in terms of astronomy is the Very Large Array Radio Telescope up about 50 miles west of Socorro, New Mexico. So you can see the picture there on the right. The main part of the facility consists of 27 dishes. Each one of those is 25 meters across, and it weighs something like 200 tons. And they can be configured in various ways, but what they can do is give the effective aperture of something on the order of 600 meters. So imagine a 600-meter telescope. If you've studied physics, optics, you know that the diffraction limit of a telescope is related to the aperture size. The larger the aperture, the better the resolution. So this is capable of resolving extremely minute details all through a wide range of radio frequencies. So many of the stunning images that you see of distant galaxies and so on, and seeing hot spots for star formation and so on, came from this facility. So it's a very interesting facility. It does have visitor facilities. They're currently closed, as are many of these, but they will be reopening soon as we get past the virus. New Mexico is known for its clear, dark skies. That's one of the reasons that there are so many observatories here. It is always a great pleasure for me. We do many of our launches in the wee hours or in the early morning hours. And so frequently that means that we report to the spaceport in the wee hours for the purpose of preparing for those launches. And it has been a great source of pleasure for me to be out there with people who, unfortunately for them, have never experienced an area with really, truly dark skies. And they look up and they're just stunned when they see the Milky Way with their own eyes. You know, people have seen these pictures, but there's nothing that substitutes for seeing it with your own eyes. The picture on the bottom was actually one of the comets of a few years ago, and that's a picture I actually took in my backyard. So even though I live close to Las Cruces, the skies are still dark enough that I can barely pick out the Milky Way at times, and scenes like this can be readily seen. All right, now I want to move on to nature and outdoors. And again, this is one of my passions. I'm a hiker, and so I have hundreds, if not thousands, of photos that I've taken of all sorts of interesting places. So let me tell you first a little bit about New Mexico, its diverse landscape. So in the north, we have the Rocky Mountains with alpine tundra even, the highest peak being Wheeler Peak, which is 13,161 feet, over 4,000 meters above sea level. Most of the state is what's known to geologists as basin and range province. So it's characterized by narrow mountain ranges separated by broad valleys. So the Chihuahuan Desert in the southern part of New Mexico, where Las Cruces is located, and likewise Spaceport America, is actually located within that basin and range province. So we have mountain ranges in that part of the state that easily reach 10,000 to 11,000 feet. And Spaceport America is located in one of the basins, one of those broad basins, one of those broad valleys known as the Jornada del Muerto. And then we also have the river valleys in New Mexico, which have a lot of irrigated farmland. So the varied landscape provides opportunities for all sorts of things. Hiking, of course, cycling, mountain biking, rock climbing is common in many parts of the state, both cross-country and downhill skiing, bird watching and wildlife observation, hunting and fishing, rock collecting, rafting, canoeing, off-roading, photography, sightseeing. So the next series of slides will show you some of those things. So this is a trailhead in the Sacramento Mountains. This was a day when we'd had just a dusting of snow, but it was a fantastic day to be out there and hike. This is a scene in the Oregon Mountains, just east of Las Cruces. This is taken from Baylor Pass, and if you have reasonable physical fitness, it's a fairly easy hike. A couple of hours and you're up to this site with incredible views. The Oregon Mountains from the Geary Springs National Recreation Area are stunning. They are some of the most rugged mountains anywhere in the U.S. They're not that high. They only reach about 9,000 feet, but they are stunning in their ruggedness. And the scenes from up there, so as you can see, Las Cruces in the background, looking out from one of those high locations, the scenic vistas are incredible. We also have some, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, really interesting landscapes. We have a number of lava flows in the state, old lava flows, and you can see some incredible geology in those things as well. The Oregon Mountains are an ever-changing source of incredible scenery. So during parts of the year, we have these lenticular clouds that form over the mountains, and the scenery is just amazing. Now come winter, we get a dusting of snow, and the mountains take on an entirely different character. So again, you can go out and if you go out 5 consecutive days, the mountains will look different over Las Cruces. One of the things that's incredible about New Mexico is how few people are out there. This large state, with its relatively small population, just gobbles up the people, the hikers such as myself. So on this particular hike, we do this, my wife and I do this maybe once a year on the average, and we are yet to see other hikers on this particular trail. In the north, up in the Rocky Mountains, we have these natural mountain lakes. The scenery is just amazing. It's a great place to visit. The hikes can be any length you want, anything from half an hour, I suppose, from a trailhead near one of these lakes, up to days-long backpacking trips into the wilderness. And here's a frequent destination that we hike to. I've probably been to this location 200 times over the years. And it's a great place. It's a little over 10,000 feet. It's a great destination, 5 miles in, 5 miles out, really, really pleasant hike. And one of the things about this is 2 years ago, I spent some time visiting some friends in Colorado, and we went to one of those famous Colorado hiking destination, Maroon Bells. I am sure that in the first half of that hike, we encountered more hikers on that trail than we have seen in probably 200 hikes on this particular trail. The typical number we see is 2, sometimes 3 or 4. Rarely you'll encounter a group, but rarely do you see more than a very small number of people. And the nice thing about it is, since all of us who do these kinds of hikes have a similar ethic about nature and the environment, you don't see discarded trash or anything like you often see in more touristy areas. These desert mountain ranges are great destinations as well. So in the cooler months, we go out, we just drive out on a dirt road someplace, park the vehicle, and start hiking toward a mountain. And you get up to the top, and you're treated to these incredible vistas. This particular scene was taken in a small range of mountains that is just a little bit south of Spaceport, America. And again, the scenery is incredible. The number of people that you encounter is very small. It's just an incredible experience. I mentioned skiing. I'm a skier, but I don't have a lot of pictures because usually when I ski, I'm too busy flying down the mountain to stop and take pictures. But the landscapes, again, are incredible. New Mexico has a number of ski areas, including Taos, which is one of the premier ski areas in the U.S., so incredible opportunities for skiing and snowboarding. Also rafting, mountain biking, and snowshoeing. You know, you don't think of that, but it's something I enjoy when winter comes and we have snow in the mountains. It's an incredible way to get out and go to places that would otherwise be off limits in the wintertime, because the snow can be quite deep in the mountains, but strap on those snowshoes and you can go very, very well. One of the special places is White Sands National Park, and it's about an hour, or a little more than an hour, I suppose, east of Las Cruces along US 70. It's a huge expanse of white sand. It's actually gypsum, calcium sulfate, and it originates in those mountains. It's slightly soluble in water. It washes down. The water evaporates from a place called Lake Lucero, and ultimately these fine particles of gypsum are formed and make these incredible dunes. And again, the scenery there is absolutely stunning, and it's a great place to visit. It has just amazing opportunities. One of the things that many of us like to do is to slide down the dunes. You can rent or bring your own snow coaster. You go up to the dunes and you can slide down the dunes and get an exhilarating feeling, much like skiing, but it's summertime outside, or it can be. Another attraction in the Las Cruces area is a true slot canyon. There are actually 3 of these nearby, but 2 of them are harder to get to than this particular one. So many people know about this. And this is a canyon which is carved by flowing water, but in many places, if you're standing in the canyon bottom and you extend your hands outward, you can touch both walls of the canyon. Probably not a good place for people who are claustrophobic, but an incredible place to visit. The scenery is just amazing. I mentioned the lava flows. So the Aden lava flow and Kilburn Hole. Now, this is actually not Kilburn Hole. This is another type of crater that's formed out there. But Apollo astronauts trained here back in the 1960s to familiarize themselves with certain kinds of geology so that when they went to the moon, they'd be able to maximize the scientific benefits from going there. So this particular lava flow is huge. And it's a great place to hike. It's not really that good in the summertime, but in the wintertime, you can just go cross country and hike out there. It's good to have a GPS because after a while, everything looks the same, but it's a fantastic place to hike. I thoroughly enjoy going out there in the cooler months. And again, another photo from there, there is another crater called Aden Crater, which is really interesting. And it just gives you this idea of this volcanic landscape. And it's not that old geologically. All right, New Mexico is also known for hot air ballooning. This particular set of balloons was actually, I took this photo myself at a Las Cruces balloon rally, which hasn't happened for a couple of years now for obvious reasons. But the Albuquerque International Balloon Fiesta, which happens in October every year, and they have announced that it will be back on this year, has as many as several hundred, 800 to 1,000 balloons that take to the sky in the mass ascension. So that is an incredible sight. Now, it doesn't coincide with the Spaceport America Cup time-wise, but it's a great opportunity if you happen to find an interest in hot air ballooning and incredibly colorful displays. This is a great place to be. The balloonists are, I think, almost by definition, friendly people. They love showing their balloons. They recruit people to be parts of their chase crews in some situations. It's just an incredible experience to see these balloons and maybe even have an opportunity to take a ride. Another really interesting attraction is the Sandia Peak Tramway. So some of these facilities, such as this is a great place to get a mountain view if you're not really into hiking. You can start in the Albuquerque, east side of Albuquerque, and take this tramway up a few thousand feet in elevation gain and have these incredible views from the mountain ridge in the Sandia Mountains. So again, if you're not really into hiking but want to be able to have some of those views, you can take that tramway and then take some easy walks along the rim of the Sandia Mountains, looking down over Albuquerque. Another such attraction for people who really maybe aren't into hiking but like to get out into the wilds is the Cumbres and Toltec Scenic Railroad. This actually operates between Chama, New Mexico and Antonito, Colorado. In fact, the railroad is jointly owned by the states of Colorado and New Mexico. And there's absolutely incredible scenery along the trip. They operate authentic steam locomotives. This is actually a narrow gauge railroad. It's an artifact of what was once the Denver and Rio Grande, which was a railroad that was specialized in servicing the mining that took place in the Rocky Mountains. And for that reason, they used these narrow gauge running stock so that they would be able to more easily negotiate sharp curves and things like that. But now the vestiges remain as the Cumbres and Toltec, and then also in Colorado, the Durango and Silverton narrow gauge railroad. So both of those are incredible opportunities for people who want to get out and experience the wilds without actually having to hike very much. Along Las Cruces, the Rio Grande flows through, and again, incredible views that you can see of mountains and flowing water. And at certain times of the year, you'll see animals, wildlife. Again, you have to be able to walk some to get to some of these kinds of sites. But there are places where you can see sites like this just by getting out of your car and walking maybe 10 or 15 minutes. The aspen trees that are common in the mountains turn golden in the fall, and the views are just stunning. We are also noted for our spectacular cloud formations, incredible lightning displays, and amazing sunsets. So these kinds of clouds are just amazingly scenic. Lightning displays, it takes a little effort to capture these sorts of things, but the views are just amazing to see. And rainbows and incredible sunsets. Those are some lenticular clouds caught in sunset. The effect is just, to me, is just stunning. And these are regular occurrences. Now, we have a lot of days without colorful sunsets, but that's because we have so many cloud-free days. So it's, but probably on the average of several times a month, we will get just the right conditions where the clouds are just right at the time of sunrise or sunset, and we get these incredible views. One of the things that I really like about New Mexico are the wildflowers. Again, we have so many different varied landscapes that we get different types of wildflowers. We have truly the plains wildflowers in some places, and we have the Rocky Mountain wildflowers. These are Mexican gold poppies, which just east of Las Cruces on the eastern flanks of the Oregon Mountains in a good year will just blanket the hillsides. And I'll show you another shot of that here shortly. But the flowers are just amazing. And I love to get up close and photograph them. They're just incredible variety, and it's just a very enjoyable experience. So here's an example of what I was saying, how those Mexican gold poppies can just blanket hillsides. It is just amazing how it almost looks from a distance as if the hillside is on fire from the huge number of these poppies that are in bloom. This happens typically in March and April. Again, that's what the actual poppy, the lower right-hand corner is an actual poppy flower up close, but when you have millions of them on a hillside, the effect is stunning. And there's a great opportunity if you are into photography, the landscapes, the flowers, the scenery, just endless opportunities for you to do those sorts of things. We also have lots and lots of animals. So a couple of deer that I happened to photograph up on a mountain peak when we were having lunch one day, they came up to just to wander through. These were literally, these foxes were actually in my backyard a few years ago. These were two baby foxes. Their mom was nearby, but she was staying out of the scene. A typical Western scene, now obviously not a wild animal, but a scene like this is worth $1 million. It's just incredible that you have these opportunities with these incredible landscapes. We have a place called Bosque del Apache National Wildlife Refuge, which is a bird sanctuary. And in the migratory season, in the fall in particular, the birds are amazing in numbers. There are actually several other wildlife refuges in New Mexico that have similar opportunities. But look at that. That's a combination of snow geese, and on the ground you can still see some sandhill cranes, but literally thousands and thousands of birds. And if you're a photographer and you like these sorts of things, the opportunities are endless. You can easily spend a day there and have all sorts of opportunities. There's a great horned owl. Now, this particular photo was taken right outside the entry to White Sands National Park. It was nesting in a yucca tree. And it just think about the opportunity to see something like this up close and personal. There's a flock of wild turkeys that we encountered on a hike once. And of course, we have smaller animals as well. Lizards abound in New Mexico. We have many, many different species, a collared lizard and a horny toad or horned toad. On the right, not all the animals are vertebrates. We have tarantulas, for example. Interesting spiders. They're harmless, but they're fascinating to see and watch. Butterflies and other insects that are colorful, just fantastic opportunities to see these kinds of things. And I mentioned off-roading. I don't like to do it. I like to stay on roads. I'm not one who believes in tearing up the landscape, but nevertheless, it's great fun to go out on those roads and get you to places that would be very difficult to reach otherwise. All right, now let's move on and talk a little bit about culture and history in New Mexico. I want to start off with Native American culture, contemporary Native American culture. So one of the things which is a great opportunity, in my view, is the native population, the people are very, very gracious about allowing outsiders to see some of their ceremonies and things. So in Albuquerque, there's this facility called the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center, and they have periodically they have this exhibits of Indian dances and art and all sorts of things. So it's a great place to come and learn about the native cultures. These people's histories go back thousands of years. They were one with the landscape. They know more things than we'll ever know, I think, about the landscape than non-native populations, that is, will ever know about the landscape. And their traditions are colorful, they're exciting to watch, and it's a great way to spend a day. Some of the pueblos allow you to actually come and visit them. So Acoma Pueblo on the left, which is also known as Sky City, that pueblo is built atop a mesa. And it was built there for defensive purposes because there were threats to the populations in prehistoric times. And so this was a very, very good, safe place to locate. But Taos Pueblo is another fantastic place to visit. Again, the people, if you're willing to spend a few dollars, they will allow themselves to be photographed, and you can have some incredible experiences visiting these places. One of the things that I really enjoy are petroglyphs. There are just many, many, many places where you can see incredible petroglyphs throughout New Mexico, and some places with other types of rock art as well, called pictographs, which are done with paint, but petroglyphs are chiseled into stone. So you can just imagine people taking the time to do these things. And some of them, for example, one of them that I particularly find fascinating is a place where in the bedrock, there are these holes that were left by grinding grain. And so you can just imagine, 3,000 years ago, mom was grinding grain for the evening meal, and the kids needed something to do, and so nearby they were out there carving into the stone. It's an incredible thought to think what that scene would have looked like when those petroglyphs were being carved. And again, I find these a source of endless fascination. And some of them are extremely sophisticated in their artistic approach. You'll find places where the picture continues around a right angle in a rock face, for example. Just absolutely amazing. There are also several places with cliff dwellings in New Mexico. Now, the best known cliff dwellings are probably Mesa Verde National Park, which is in southern Colorado. But we have Bandelier National Monument, and that's where these photographs were taken. These cliff dwellings were carved into the rock face in some volcanic material, which is relatively soft and relatively easy to penetrate. And they have large rooms and all sorts of ceremonial locations. So it's a great place to spend a day again. I probably already accounted for 100 days for your stay if you really wanted to partake of all these things. But choose the things that are to your interest and concentrate on them. Another really interesting thing that we have are lots of ghost towns and ruins. So many of these ghost towns date back to mining times. There were gold rushes and silver rushes and so on. And so towns would spring up, and some of the more durable buildings are still there, and they can be visited and explored. So these are incredible opportunities. There's ruins of an old ranch house, which is basically at the base of the Oregon Mountains. You can get to this place from Las Cruces, including the walking time, in less than an hour. We have both Spanish and Mexican traditions as well, and those are celebrated throughout New Mexico. The dancing, the mariachis, the art. It is just an incredible thing to see how these cultures have come together and remain vibrant today. This is an example. This is in the town of Mesilla, just barely south of Las Cruces. This is the Christmas Eve, the luminarias that are put out. These kinds of scenes are commonplace in New Mexico. And another growing thing is wine tasting. We have more and more wineries in New Mexico, and many of them have tasting opportunities. So if you are into wines, that's another really interesting thing that you can do. Some of the more offbeat things include the UFO Museum and the festival in Roswell. So you probably have heard at least of the Roswell incident, the UFO which supposedly crashed near Roswell in the late 1940s, I think it was, and a whole culture has sprung up around that. They have exhibits, they have museums, and then during the summertime, they normally have the festival. It's going to be on again this year. So a great place if you can extend your visit and you're interested in that sort of thing. It's a great place to visit. Now let's move on and talk a little bit about the arts. So I find the Native American art to be particularly interesting. So on the lower right is every year there is this thing called the Crown Point auction. I think it's actually held several times a year. But the Native American weavers bring their rugs and blankets and sell them at auction. So they make incredibly beautiful wall hangings. I think it would be a shame to put one on a floor, even though they are called rugs, to put one on the floor and walk on it. They're works of art. They are incredible time consuming in making them, but the people who do them make them available here. The scene on the lower left is at the Palace of the Governors in Santa Fe. So during normal times, vendors of Native American, mostly jewelry and smaller pieces of art, sit out there on that walkway and make their creations available to the public for sale. It's an incredible opportunity to see that. So again, the picture on the left is a typical scene there on the Palace of the Governors, those pieces of jewelry. The Native Americans in New Mexico draw on many traditions of craftsmanship. Weaving is one, pottery making is another, and silversmithing is yet another. So the pottery it can be stunning. There are Santa Clara Pueblo in particular is noted for its potters, and many of the others as well. I think Acoma has a style. These are just incredible works of art, and many people like to collect them. They are just stunning to have. The rug on the right is a typical example of a Navajo weaving. Again, they're hand done, and in many cases, the wool is dyed with the same kinds of dye stuffs that were used in prehistoric times. The people know how to do these things. They've been doing it for centuries, and they produce some incredibly beautiful works of art. Moving on to what many of us think of as art, again, the Museum of Art in Santa Fe, the New Mexico Museum. Now, this is actually the Palace of the Governors from the side, which is the entry to the museum. So if you were to go around the corner, the building at the extreme left, and take a hard right turn, then you would be at the location where those Native Americans are out there selling their artwork and their jewelry. But if you go inside from this side, you have the Museum of Art, the New Mexico Museum of Art. Many, many different types of art on display, for anything from Spanish colonial periods up to fairly modern art. And another Santa Fe art attraction is the George O'Keeffe Museum. George O'Keeffe was a noted artist who lived in New Mexico in the early to mid 20th century and produced well-known works of art. And there is a museum devoted to her work there in New Mexico, in Santa Fe. There are numerous galleries around the state. Every city practically has some. There's a concentration of them in both Santa Fe and Taos. But if you're interested in collecting art, and many of these exhibits specialize in certain areas of art. For example, one of them specializes in glass art. They have incredible displays, and all of it is for sale in those kinds of galleries. We also have immersive art. So there is this place called Meow Wolf, which is now starting to spread around the country. And they're building additional outlets. I think there's one under construction in Las Vegas, and I think there are going to be several others around the U.S. and the Western U.S. in particular. And this is immersive art. You actually walk through these exhibits. I haven't had the opportunity myself yet, but I'm told that it is actually a stunning thing to see. And so once again, I want to stress, encourage you to spend some time with us. You'll be glad you did if you make a little extra time when you come to the Cup next year. Spend a little extra time with us, and you'll have some opportunities to experience friendly people, incredible landscapes, and incredible resources of all types. I think that wraps it up. I thank you for your attention, and hopefully you will take advantage of this and come visit us in New Mexico.
So we do have a question for you, Dr. Bill.
Sure.
It says, kind of random, how regularly does sandstorms occur at the spaceport, and how does it affect flights and launches?
Okay, so that's a really good question. We do have these things. I'm going to stop by sharing here, I think, if I can get back to my... So we do have sandstorms or dust storms mostly. They're not really coarse enough to be considered sandstorms, I think, in that sense. But we have them in the spring. Typically, they're associated with frontal passages. And so our windy season is mostly March. And the result of that is that I'd say probably 1 day out of 7, we will have a strong winds and lots of dust in the air. Now, the good thing about this in terms of launches is that the sandstorms are mainly an afternoon and evening phenomenon. So even on days when we have those things, if you are able to get your rocket launch off, say before 10 a.m., the chances of being adversely affected by a sandstorm are very, very slim. In the summertime, we also have some winds that are associated with thunderstorms. So we have a different kind of thunderstorm in New Mexico than many people are familiar with. We don't have typically these long lines of thunderstorms, but what we have are isolated cells that occur because of convective heating out in the desert. And those, again, can produce some strong winds, but again, they're an afternoon and evening phenomenon. So if you can do your launch in the morning, I would say there is a 95% chance that you will not be adversely affected by any weather.
Bill, you need to stop sharing, so you need to push that red button in the middle. It's okay. You're seeing me multiple screens.
I'm sorry.
There isn't any other questions written in here, but both of us are imports here to New Mexico, and I always get the question when people come to visit me, so I think it's a good one to ask for the students coming. If you had one place to visit when you're here for a limited time, and they're going to be based here in Las Cruces and TLC area, what would be that one place that you would recommend students to visit?
I guess it would probably be White Sands National Park. It is unique in the world as far as I know. There is no other place like it. The dunes have a different character. Many of you probably seen sand dunes in other places, but the dunes have a different character here because the gypsum isn't as dense as quartz, which is the more common mineral that sand dunes are composed of. And so they have a different structure than you'll see in most places. And it's a stunning landscape. You can walk just a short distance and think you're the only person on Earth out there. So it's a really amazing place to visit.
Anybody who is a space fan, which I'm assuming you all are, it's also where the shuttle landed many years ago. So they had to deal with the gypsum when they landed here. NASA did some test piloting back in the 1990s, and I think it was the 1990s here as well, because I remember Nicole Stott was based at White Sands when she was doing some piloting there for NASA. So always a good one to add in with the space history.
Yeah, and it is true as far as the space shuttle is concerned. So NASA actually trained the space shuttle pilots for landing at White Sands. So as Alice mentioned there, the shuttle landed there, but the same landing strip that they actually landed on was used for the approach training. So they had a specially modified aircraft that flew just like the shuttle. You know, the shuttle was some people described it as a lead balloon or a rock with wings because it didn't fly all that well. It didn't need to, but it did require very skilled pilots. And so that's where they trained. So they would go out there and fly approach after approach after approach after approach. So Virgin Galactic, one of their pilots is a former shuttle pilot, and he has thousands of hours, thousands of approaches, that he flew landing there to perfect his skills to be able to safely land the space shuttle.
Excellent. And I see Chris Markham's put a spin launch employee nearby, says about once a week they experience a haboob. Yes, but haboobs can move in quite quickly, wouldn't you say, Bill, and move out quite quickly at Spaceport? We don't tend to have too much interference. We always recommend flying very early in the morning from Spaceport America. The weather tends to be better in the mornings. And we so far haven't had too many issues with weather having to change things around. with.
Yeah, we will occasionally get a fairly breezy afternoon, even in the summertime. But usually, again, the winds are associated with thunderstorms or with the frontal passages. The haboob type thing. So our spin launch customer, one of the things that's a little different there is that their site is under active construction. So there is more loose surface material there than there are in most places. So they probably experience it a little more often than you would in almost any other place in New Mexico.
Got another great question for you, which I think both of us can answer. Is what's the most New Mexican thing to do in New Mexico?
Go ahead and give me yours. You've lived here less than I have.
Probably the question, are you red or green?
Yeah.
New Mexico is world famous for chili, and particularly green chili. Hatch, which is just down the road from Spaceport, America, produces the best chili in the world, and we put chili in everything. And I say we because I've been here for 7 years, and you become an official New Mexican when you have roasted and skinned your own chilies, which I have done. So I think that's probably the most New Mexican thing to do.
I have to agree. Eating anything with chili, green or red, the cuisine is unique. A lot of people like to stress that it's New Mexican food. It isn't really Mexican food as much as it is New Mexico, because it does draw on the indigenous ingredients, the chili and the other ingredients that are grown locally. And so it's a fantastic experience. And again, the hospitality of the people. I was amazed when I moved here. It's been over 40 years ago, but one of the things that amazed me, I came from a different part of the United States, and I could not believe how friendly the people were here. It is just an amazing experience to see that, to experience that firsthand.
I think that's all the questions we've had so far, Dr. Bill. Thank you so much for giving us your overview. I learned lots from it, so I'm hoping all the students are, and I hope you're able to join us here in New Mexico next year. If you ever have any questions for us, the team here at Spaceport America are available in our lounge area and our expo until the end of today, and we'll be happy to answer questions about where to stay, what to see, what you're going to experience when you're out here in 2022. And we will be releasing those dates for next year at the awards ceremony this afternoon. So thank you all.
Thank you all.